I stood in the funeral home, staring at a casket that held the man who had been my husband for 47 years. David had been gone for over a week now, but the reality still hadn't fully sunk in. The terminal cancer diagnosis had given us time to prepare, but nothing truly prepares you for the finality of death. My son Michael approached, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. "Mom, we've got everything arranged for you. Sarah has the guest room ready at her place for the next few weeks. Then we can figure out if you want to stay there or maybe move closer to me and Jennifer in Boston." I nodded absently, not really processing his words. Around me, family members and friends moved about, murmuring condolences, bringing plates of food I had no appetite for. I was 70 years old, and everyone was treating me like I was as dead as my husband, just not buried yet. My daughter Sarah, ever the organizer, was already discussing my financial situation with her husband in hushed tones nearby. Mom's pension should cover her basic needs, and Dad's life insurance will help. We just need to make sure she's comfortable and taken care of. Taken care of. The phrase echoed in my mind. For the past 5 decades, I'd been the one taking care of everyone else: my students as an elementary school teacher, my husband, my children. When had I last done something just for me? I excused myself and walked to the bathroom, needing a moment of privacy. The face that stared back at me from the mirror looked tired. My silver hair was neatly styled, my blue dress appropriately somber. I was the perfect picture of a grieving widow. But behind my eyes, something unexpected was stirring. That night, after everyone had finally left me alone in the home David and I had shared for 4 decades, I sat in his study looking through our financial documents. David had always handled our money, but I wasn't completely in the dark. I knew about our savings, his pension, the life insurance policy, and the value of our house in the suburbs of Philadelphia, a house that suddenly felt too big, too empty, and too full of memories simultaneously. I opened my laptop and, on a whim, typed, "starting over at 70. The search results surprised me. Stories of people my age and older beginning new businesses, moving to new countries, finding new love, pursuing education. People who refused to believe that reaching their 70s meant the end of living. 3 days later, as my children continued making plans for my future without really consulting me, I found myself looking at flights to Portugal. I'd always wanted to visit Europe, but David had preferred cruises and all-inclusive resorts. Lisbon looked beautiful, with its colorful buildings and oceanside location. I discovered that Portugal had a reasonable cost of living and a climate similar to California. "Mom, have you thought about what you want to do with all of Dad's clothes?" Sarah asked as she brought me a cup of tea I hadn't requested. "Jennifer and I can help you sort through them this weekend if you'd like." I looked at my daughter, my well-meaning, controlling daughter who had always been just like me, the caretaker, the organizer, the one who knew what was best for everyone else. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "I've been thinking about making some bigger changes." Sarah paused, tea sloshing slightly in the cup she was holding. "What kind of changes, Mom? Do you want to redecorate? I know this house has a lot of Dad's touches." "I'm thinking of selling the house," I said. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but also strangely right. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Selling? But Mom, you've lived here for decades. All your friends are nearby. Where would you go? Michael's place doesn't have much room, but you could stay with us until—" "I'm not moving in with either of you," I interrupted. "I'm thinking of moving to Portugal." The teacup clattered against the saucer as Sarah nearly dropped it. "Portugal? The country? Mom, that's absurd. You're 70 years old. You don't speak Portuguese. You don't know anyone there. This is grief talking." Perhaps it was grief talking. Or perhaps grief had finally allowed me to hear my own voice for the first time in decades. "I've been researching it," I said calmly. "The cost of living is lower than here. I could sell this house and buy a small apartment in Lisbon with money to spare. The climate is beautiful. They have excellent health care." "This is crazy talk," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling Michael. You're not thinking straight." As Sarah frantically dialed her brother, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. For the first time since David's diagnosis, I wasn't simply reacting to life happening to me. I was contemplating creating a life for myself. By the time Michael arrived the next day, Sarah had rallied the troops. My son-in-law Jeff, my daughter-in-law Jennifer, and even my sister Lois had been called to talk some sense into me. "Mom," Michael said in that patronizing tone adults often use with children, "we understand you're going through a difficult time. But making radical life changes right after Dad's death is textbook grief response. You need time to process, not jet off to a foreign country where you'll be all alone." "I've been thinking about this for a while," I lied. In truth, the idea was only days old, but it felt like I'd been working toward it my entire life. David and I talked about what I might do after he was gone. Another lie, but one that made them all exchange uncertain glances. "Did Dad know you wanted to move to Portugal?" Sarah asked skeptically. "He knew I wanted to travel more, to see places we never got to visit together," I said, which was at least partially true. "Look, I'm not making any hasty decisions. I'm just exploring options." That seemed to calm them somewhat. They probably thought this was just a phase, that I'd come to my senses after a few weeks of research. Little did they know that with each passing day, my determination only grew stronger. I listed our house with a realtor the following week. The market was good, and the spacious suburban home where we'd raised our family attracted multiple offers above asking price within days. When I accepted one of the offers, my children went from concerned to panicked. "Mom, this is happening too fast," Michael insisted during our family dinner, which had become more like an intervention. "At least take a vacation to Portugal first before you commit to moving there." "That's exactly what I plan to do," I assured them. "I'm not burning all my bridges. I'm going to rent a small apartment for 3 months and see how I like it. If it doesn't work out, I can always come back." "And live where?" Sarah demanded. "You'll have sold your house. Then I'll buy a condo, or rent something smaller. I don't need a 4-bedroom house anymore." My grandchildren, thankfully, thought my plan was totally cool. 12-year-old Emma was particularly enthusiastic. "Grandma's going to live in Europe. That's awesome. We can visit you, right?" "Of course," I said, smiling at my granddaughter while my children exchanged worried looks. "You're all welcome to visit anytime." As the closing date for the house approached, I sorted through decades of accumulated possessions. It was both heartbreaking and liberating. I kept some precious photos and mementos, but so much of what we'd collected over the years seemed meaningless now. I donated most of David's clothes to a veterans organization, gave family heirlooms to my children, and sold or donated the rest. The day before I was scheduled to fly to Lisbon, Sarah made one last attempt to dissuade me. "Mom, you know this is a mistake, right? You're running away from your grief instead of processing it. And what about your health? What if something happens to you over there, all alone?" "Sarah," I said, taking her hands in mine, "I've spent my entire life caring for others. I taught other people's children for 45 years. I raised you and Michael. I took care of Dad when he was sick. Now it's my turn to do something for myself. I'm 70, not 90. I'm in good health. And I'm not running from grief, I'm finally allowing myself to live." My daughter's eyes filled with tears. "I just don't want to lose you too." "You're not losing me," I assured her. "You're just going to have to get used to using WhatsApp to call me." The next morning, my children and their families drove me to the airport. Their faces were a mixture of worry, disbelief, and reluctant acceptance. I hugged each of them tightly, promising to check in regularly. As I walked toward the security checkpoint, rolling my single suitcase behind me, I heard Emma call out, "Go, Grandma, go." I turned to see her giving me 2 enthusiastic thumbs up while her mother tried to shush her. I smiled and waved, then continued on my way, feeling lighter than I had in years. The flight to Lisbon was long, and my body ached from sitting for so many hours. For a brief moment, I wondered if my children were right. Was I being foolish? But as the plane began its descent and I caught my first glimpse of the Portuguese coast, excitement overcame doubt. I had arranged a small furnished apartment in the Alfama district through an online rental service. The building was old, with no elevator, and I questioned my decision as I struggled up 4 flights of stairs with my suitcase. But when my landlady, Sophia, opened the door to my new home, I gasped in delight. The apartment was tiny but charming, with white walls, colorful tiles, and a small balcony that offered a sliver of ocean view between neighboring buildings. Sophia, a woman in her 50s who spoke excellent English, showed me around and gave me keys to what would be my home for the next 3 months. "You are very brave," she said as she prepared to leave. "Coming to a new country at your age, all alone." "Or very foolish," I replied with a smile. "My children certainly think so." Sophia shrugged. "Life is too short for regrets. My mother is 85 and her biggest regret is all the things she never tried." She handed me her phone number. "Call if you need anything. And welcome to Lisbon, Martha." After she left, I unpacked my few belongings and stood on the balcony, watching the sun begin to set over the terracotta rooftops. The air smelled of salt and something unfamiliar but pleasant, perhaps the seafood being cooked in a nearby restaurant. Exhaustion hit me suddenly, and I barely managed to make up the bed before collapsing into a deep sleep. The first week was challenging. Despite my research, I was unprepared for the steepness of Lisbon's hills, the difficulty of navigating narrow, cobblestone streets, and the frustration of not speaking the language. There were moments when I sat in my tiny apartment, aching from walking and overwhelmed by the newness of everything, when I seriously considered booking a flight back to Philadelphia. During one such moment of doubt, I received a video call from Sarah and Emma. "How's Portugal, Grandma?" Emma asked eagerly, her face filling the screen. "It's beautiful," I said, not wanting to admit my struggles. "Very hilly though. My legs are getting quite a workout." "Mom, you look tired," Sarah commented, her face appearing beside Emma's. "Are you sleeping okay? Is the time change difficult?" "I'm fine, just adjusting," I assured her. "How are things at home?" "We're all worried about you," Sarah said. "Michael wants to know if you've figured out the healthcare situation yet." I hadn't, and the reminder added to my anxiety. After ending the call with promises to stay safe and check in regularly, I lay on my bed and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. I was a 70-year-old widow who didn't speak the language, living alone in a foreign country, with stairs that winded me and hills that made my knees ache. What was I thinking? The next morning, determined not to give up so easily, I ventured to a small cafe I'd spotted near my apartment. The young woman behind the counter smiled as I entered. "Bom dia," I said, using one of the few Portuguese phrases I'd learned. "Good morning," she replied in English. "You are American?" I nodded, relieved. "Is it that obvious?" She laughed. "A little. But many tourists come here. What would you like?" I ordered coffee and a pastry, then took a seat by the window. As I watched the neighborhood come to life, an elderly Portuguese woman entered the cafe. She must have been at least 80, but she moved with purpose, greeting the staff by name before taking a seat near me. After placing her order, she turned to me and said something in Portuguese. When I shook my head apologetically, she switched to heavily accented English. "You are new here. I see you yesterday, with the suitcase." "Yes," I confirmed. "I just arrived from the United States." "Ah, America," she nodded. "Vacation?" "Not exactly," I explained. "I'm starting over." The words sounded strange, but they felt right. The woman, who introduced herself as Beatriz, regarded me with interest. "Starting over? At our age? This is unusual. My husband died," I explained. "My children wanted me to move in with them or to a retirement community. I decided I wanted something different." Beatriz's face broke into a wide smile, revealing several missing teeth. "Good for you. I live alone for 20 years since my Antonio died. My children also think I should live with them. I tell them no. This is my life." We chatted for nearly an hour. Beatriz had lived in the neighborhood her entire life and knew every street, shop, and restaurant. When she discovered I was struggling with the hills and stairs, she shared her secret. "You must rest. Not hurry. Take the tram when you can. And find purpose. Purpose makes the hills smaller." "Purpose?" I asked. "Reason to climb," she explained simply. "When Antonio first died, I stay inside, too sad to leave. Then my neighbor need help with her baby. I go every day to help her. Soon, I don't notice the stairs anymore." After our coffee, Beatriz insisted on showing me where to shop for the best produce and which bakery made the finest bread. We moved slowly through the neighborhood, stopping frequently for her to catch her breath or greet neighbors. By the time we parted ways, I had a list of practical tips for living in Alfama and a promise to meet for coffee the following week. That chance encounter changed everything. Through Beatriz, I met other locals who welcomed me into their community despite my broken Portuguese. I began taking language classes 3 mornings a week at a nearby cultural center, where I met fellow expatriates from around the world. Among them was George, a 68-year-old retired chef from London who had moved to Lisbon 2 years earlier. Like me, he had chosen Portugal for its climate and affordability after his wife's death. "Best decision I ever made," he told me over lunch after class one day. "My kids thought I was having a mental breakdown at first. Now they love visiting. Free holidays in Portugal, right?" George introduced me to a group of expatriate seniors who met weekly for dinners, outings, and cultural events. Suddenly, my calendar was filling up with social engagements. I was making friends, learning Portuguese, and discovering a city that grew more charming by the day. I started a blog to document my experiences, initially just to share photos and updates with my family. But to my surprise, it began attracting readers, other seniors considering similar life changes, younger people curious about my journey, and travel enthusiasts interested in Portugal. As my 3-month rental neared its end, Sarah called with what she clearly thought was good news. "Mom, we've found the perfect place for you back home," she announced. "It's a beautiful senior living community just 10 minutes from us. They have independent living apartments but also assisted living if you need it later. And they allow pets, so you could finally get that cat you always wanted." I gazed out at my now familiar view of Lisbon's rooftops and felt my heart sink at the thought of leaving. "Sarah, I'm not coming back. Not permanently, anyway." Silence. "Then, what do you mean?" "This was supposed to be a 3-month experiment. And the experiment worked," I explained. "I'm happy here. I've made friends. I'm learning the language. I want to stay." What followed was another family crisis. Michael flew to Lisbon, ostensibly to help me think through my options, but clearly on a mission to bring me home. He arrived expecting to find me isolated and struggling. Instead, he met my vibrant community of friends, joined one of our group dinners, and witnessed firsthand how I had created a life for myself. "You really do seem happy, Mom," he admitted as we walked along the waterfront on his final day. "But what about when you get older? What about serious healthcare needs?" "Portugal has excellent healthcare," I reminded him. "And I've been researching residency options. If I buy property here, I can apply for permanent residency." Michael stopped walking. "You're thinking of buying an apartment? That's a huge commitment." "I'm not just thinking about it," I said. "I've already started looking at properties." My son ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "Dad's barely been gone 6 months, and you're making permanent plans to live thousands of miles away from your family." "Michael," I said gently, "your father would want me to be happy. And for the first time in a very long time, I am happy. Not just content, not just getting by, but genuinely happy." He didn't have an argument for that. 2 weeks after Michael returned to Boston, I made an offer on a small 1-bedroom apartment in a building with an elevator, located in a slightly less hilly area but still within walking distance of my favorite cafe. The process of buying property as a foreigner was complicated, but with help from an expatriate lawyer recommended by George, I navigated the paperwork. Sarah was furious when I told her. "You're spending our inheritance on a whim," she accused during a tense video call. "Sarah Elizabeth," I said, using my teacher voice, "first of all, that money was mine and your father's, not your inheritance. Second, I'm not spending all of it, I'm investing in a place to live. And third, this isn't a whim. This is a carefully considered life decision. But what about us? What about your grandchildren?" Her voice broke. "Emma keeps asking when you're coming home." "You can all visit," I said. "My new place has a pull-out sofa in the living room. And I'll come home for Christmas." "But Sarah, this is my home now." It took time for my family to accept my decision. Sarah eventually came around after her first visit, when she saw how active and engaged I was. Michael remained concerned but respected my choice. My grandchildren thought having a grandmother in Portugal was the coolest thing ever, and became experts at video chatting. As I settled into my new life, my blog continued to grow in popularity. What had started as a personal journal was now attracting thousands of readers monthly. I received emails from seniors around the world, asking for advice on starting over, moving abroad, and navigating life's later chapters. One such email came from Janet, a 65-year-old former publisher from Chicago. She was impressed by my writing and the way I captured the expatriate experience. "Have you ever considered turning your blog into a book?" she asked. "Stories like yours are rare but desperately needed. So many people fear aging because they see it as an end rather than a potential beginning." The idea had never occurred to me. I was a retired elementary school teacher, not an author. But Janet was persistent, offering to connect me with literary agents she knew from her publishing days. "Just think about it," she urged during a video call. "Your story could inspire countless others to take the leap." 6 months later, I signed a book contract. My memoir, Starting Over at 70, One Woman's Journey from Philadelphia to Portugal, was published the following year. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, it became a modest success, particularly among readers in their 50s and 60s contemplating their own next chapters. The book led to speaking engagements at expatriate events and retirement conferences, mostly virtual but occasionally requiring travel. At 72, I found myself with an unexpected second career as an author and advocate for active aging. When I returned to Philadelphia for Christmas that year, 2 years after David's death, the dynamic with my family had shifted dramatically. Instead of treating me like a fragile elder needing protection, they asked about my writing, my travels, my friends in Portugal. My son-in-law, who had once been among the most vocal critics of my move, now sought my advice about early retirement and possibly living abroad. "I never thought I'd say this, Mom," Sarah admitted as we washed dishes after Christmas dinner, "but you've become a role model for me. Seeing you reinvent yourself at 70. It makes me look at my own future differently. It wasn't always easy. I had health scares, a fall that resulted in a broken wrist, a bout of pneumonia that hospitalized me briefly. During those times, my children's concerns resurged, and I questioned my decision to live so far from family. But my friends in Lisbon became my local support system, checking in on me, bringing food, helping with daily tasks until I recovered. 3 years after my move to Portugal, I received an unexpected email from a small tour company specializing in trips for seniors. They had read my book and followed my blog, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in consulting on a new tour package for American seniors visiting Portugal. "We want someone who understands both cultures and the specific needs of older travelers," the owner explained during our meeting at my favorite cafe. "Your perspective would be invaluable." It started as occasional consulting but evolved into a part-time position as a tour guide for their Portugal for Seniors program. At 73, I found myself leading groups of American retirees through the streets of Lisbon, sharing my favorite spots and the lessons I'd learned as an expatriate. During one such tour, a participant asked me if I ever regretted my decision to leave everything behind. "Not for a second," I replied honestly. "There have been challenges, certainly. Moments of loneliness, health concerns, language frustrations. But I've experienced more life in these 3 years than in the decade before." "Weren't you scared?" another woman asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "But I've learned that fear and excitement often feel remarkably similar. The difference is how you frame it in your mind." On the evening of my 75th birthday, my friends organized a surprise party at a local restaurant. George, who had become a dear friend, and occasionally something more, though we kept that aspect of our relationship private, had secretly arranged for Michael, Sarah, and their families to fly in for the celebration. Seeing my children and grandchildren mingling with my Portuguese friends, watching Emma attempt to communicate in the Portuguese phrases I'd taught her, observing Michael deepen conversation with George about Portuguese cuisine, it felt like worlds colliding in the most beautiful way. Later that night, as fireworks from some local festival lit up the sky above Lisbon, I stood on my balcony reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 5 years earlier, I had been a grieving widow expected to quietly disappear into the background of my children's lives. Now I was an author, a tour guide, a blogger, an expatriate embracing a vibrant community in a foreign country. "Obrigada, Lisbon," I whispered to the twinkling cityscape before me. Thank you for giving me a second chance at living. The next morning, I received an email from a producer at a major network morning show. They wanted to interview me for a segment on redefining retirement. The producer had read my book and followed my blog, and thought my story would resonate with their viewers. We'd like to film in Lisbon, the email explained, to show your daily life and how you've created this new chapter. As I typed my enthusiastic response, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. At an age when society expected me to fade into invisibility, I was being asked to appear on national television. My son's words from 3 years ago echoed in my mind, "Mom, you're 70 years old." As if that were a reason to stop living rather than a milestone marking 7 decades of accumulated wisdom and experience. The TV segment aired 2 months later and generated an unexpected wave of interest in my story. My inbox filled with messages from viewers, mostly women in their 60s and 70s who felt trapped by societal expectations and family pressures. "How did you find the courage?" they asked. "How did you overcome the guilt? The fear? The uncertainty?" I didn't have perfect answers, but I shared what I had learned. That courage isn't the absence of fear but action in spite of it. That guilt diminishes when you recognize your right to happiness. That uncertainty is part of any life worth living, regardless of age. My blog traffic quadrupled. The publisher requested a second book focused on practical advice for seniors considering similar life changes. The tour company expanded their Portugal for Seniors program and asked me to train additional guides. At 75, I found myself busier than I had been in years, juggling writing deadlines, tour schedules, and speaking engagements. There were days when my energy flagged, when my knees protested the hills more vehemently, when I questioned whether I was trying to do too much. But each time I considered cutting back, I remembered the alternative, the quiet retirement, the gradual surrender to age, the well-meaning but stifling concern of my children. During one particularly exhausting week, I confided my fatigue to Beatrice, now 85 and still fiercely independent despite needing a cane to navigate the hills. "Of course you are tired," she said pragmatically. "You are living. Living is tiring at any age. But the alternative?" She shrugged expressively. "The alternative is to wait for death. I prefer to be tired." Her words became my mantra on difficult days. I learned to pace myself better, to balance activity with rest, to say no to opportunities that didn't excite me. But I refused to retreat from the full, complex life I had built. 4 years after moving to Portugal, I applied for and received permanent residency. The day my residency card arrived, I held a small celebration in my apartment with my closest friends. George brought champagne, Beatrice brought traditional Portuguese sweets, and Sophia, no longer just my landlady but a dear friend, presented me with a ceramic plaque for my door that read, Casa de Martha, in traditional Portuguese tiles. As we toasted my official status as a resident of Portugal, I felt a profound sense of belonging. This place that had once been completely foreign was now home in the truest sense of the word. Later that evening, after my guests had departed, I video-called my children to share the news. They congratulated me, their initial resistance long since transformed into grudging admiration and, eventually, pride. "You know, Mom," Michael said, "when you first told us about moving to Portugal, I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. But watching how you've created this whole new life for yourself, it's pretty incredible." Sarah nodded in agreement. "You've inspired a lot of people, Mom. Not just strangers who read your blog or your book, but us too. Jeff and I have started talking about taking early retirement in a few years and maybe spending part of each year somewhere different. You could start with Portugal," I suggested with a smile. "I know a great tour guide." As I approach my 76th birthday, I often reflect on how differently these years might have unfolded had I accepted the future others had planned for me. A quiet existence in a senior community, occasional visits with family. A gradual diminishing of my world until it encompassed little more than a single room. Instead, my world has expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. I speak a new language, albeit imperfectly. I've made friends from a dozen different countries. I've written books that have touched thousands of readers. I've shown my grandchildren that life can be an adventure at any age. There are still challenges, of course. I miss seeing my family more regularly. Technology helps bridge the distance, but it's not the same as being physically present for birthdays, school events, and ordinary family dinners. My health requires more attention now, and navigating healthcare in a foreign country, even one with an excellent system like Portugal, presents occasional complications. But these challenges are part of the life I chose, a life of continued growth, adventure, and possibility rather than one of gradual surrender. When I left Philadelphia 5 years ago with a single suitcase, I wasn't just leaving behind a house and familiar surroundings. I was leaving behind the narrative that society had written for me, the one that said that at 70, my story was effectively over. Instead, I stepped into a blank page and began writing a new chapter for myself. And what I discovered was that the story wasn't ending at all, it was just getting interesting. As I finish writing this, I'm sitting at my favorite cafe, watching tourists and locals pass by. Tomorrow, I'll lead another tour, meet with my publisher about the final edits on my second book, and have dinner with George, who has become the companion I never expected to find at this stage of life. Next month, my entire family is coming for a 2-week visit. Emma, now 17, has announced her intention to study abroad in Lisbon when she goes to college. "You inspired me, Grandma," she told me. "I want to be brave like you. I don't know how many more years I have or what challenges those years might bring. But I know this, whatever time remains is mine to live fully, on my own terms. And that knowledge is the most precious gift I could have given myself." To anyone reading this who stands at a similar crossroads, whether you're 70 like I was, or 50, or 90, I offer this simple truth: it's never too late to begin again. The page is blank. The pen is in your hand. Write the story you want to live.